So today I'm going to talk about where tempo decks fall in the basic Hearthstone Meta Theory. If you don't understand the basics of Hearthstone Meta Theory, I suggest you watch this video recommended here. This should go over the basics and then watch this video to understand where tempo fits in all of this. So I think before we can explain where tempo fits in meta theory, I think we need to understand what tempo actually is. In its most basic form, tempo is how much stats you have on the board. So for example, this side is my board. This side is opponent's board, right? Excuse my handwriting. Let's say I have a 2-2 on my side of the board, and my opponent has a 1-1. I have tempo. I have the ability and the choice, especially if it was my turn. We're going to assume for most of this that this is my turn. That I can not only kill this minion, or ignore it and go face, and also play another minion. The reason this is good is because my opponent will have to spend his next turn answering my board before he can spend time developing his board to be stronger. One way to calculate tempo if you're in a tough spot and you don't know if you have tempo or if you need to focus on regaining tempo, is to simply count how much stats you have on your side of the board and how much stats your opponent has on their side of the board. This can be done by adding attack and health of all your minions together and getting a number. And then you add all of the attack and health of your opponents and you have a number. The larger separation this is between these two numbers, the more tempo you have. So for example, let's say this is my turn, right? I have Boulder Fist Ogre and something Crocodile, and then my opponent has an Acidic Swamp Ooze and a Glavebon Adept. We can simply do the math here. 6 plus 4 is 10, plus 3 plus 2 is 15. I have 6 plus 7 plus 5, so I have 18, which means that I don't have a lot of tempo on the board currently. Now what's interesting here is you can make tempo trades, right? So there's a couple of trade options here, and then you can see how much tempo that a trade gives you. So for example, I trade this into this, right? Instead of 7, we now have 4. And so now this is gone, this is gone. They have a 6-4, which instead of 15 is now 10. And I have a 6-4 and a 2-3, which means that I have 15. So the difference in tempo between my opponent and me was 15 to 18 versus 10 to 5. I gained 2 tempo. Alternatively, I can trade this into this, and then trade this into this, having a 6-1, and then I have a 0 to 7 tempo. Technically, on the most basic and theoretical level, I gain more tempo by making these trades rather than the previous trades because the difference in tempo is now 7 instead of what it was before, which was 10 and 15, which is just 5. 5 versus 7, so this is technically the stronger play. Again, this is theoretical. If my opponent was playing Mage, this wouldn't be the case because he can do 1 damage to deal with this. Now, tempo also applies to life totals. Life totals are harder to calculate on a most basic and theoretical level of how much tempo it gives you, so often it's best to ignore life totals unless your opponent is close to death. The reason being is that your opponent is often forced to trade suboptimally. So let's imagine here it's my opponent's turn, and they're at 6 life, and I'm at 20. They are forced to trade both of their minions into this minion, giving me lots of tempo here, which will be 5 tempo, for their 0 tempo, rather than gaining tempo. So I will be gaining tempo. This is, of course, it's like forcing your opponent to gain tempo. Now, it's not always this extreme, right? You might not be at death, but you might be at risk of death. So you make trades that wouldn't necessarily have been optimal to gain the most tempo, or you wouldn't play the minions that would give you the most stats on board, just for the effect of not having the chance to die next turn. So this, at its most basic level, is what tempo is. Tempo decks take advantage of this mechanic by putting as much stats on the board as they can and removing as much stats of their opponents as they can without trading. The reason it's important not to trade is because if you trade, you lose tempo. Not only by dealing less damage but to your opponent's face, but also because if you trade your minions into their minions, you lose tempo by losing health on the board. So that's why the best tempo cards are cards that not only come down with a body, but also have the chance to deal more damage to your opponents. For example, Glavebound Adept is one of the strongest cards in the Tempo Demon Hunter list right now. The reason being is that it's a 6/4 that also deals 4 damage when it comes down. This is very strong because not only is it giving you 10 tempo, it's also dealing 4 and often removing more than 4. Let's say if you kill their 6/4, it's not only gaining you 10 tempo by putting 6/4 on the board, it's killing their 6/4, which means it's actually gaining you 20 tempo, which is really strong. So tempo decks really revolve around this. So they will often play as many cards as they can that give them the most tempo for the least amount of cards. Another important concept in tempo, and the thing that differentiates tempo from card advantage or simply board advantage, is that you want to do this with the least amount of mana possible. So maybe something else to consider is that this is a 6 mana 6/7. This was a 6 mana 6/4, and this is a 2 mana 3/2 and a 2 mana 2/3. Let's say I had a 2 mana card that gave this, I don't know, +4 attack. And then this trades into this. And then I play a larger minion over here for my remaining mana. Let's say it's turn 7. I play a 5 mana minion over here. This is how tempo decks operate, by gaining the most amount of tempo in a short period of time by using mana-efficient cards. Tempo tends to snowball. A lot of tempo decks play with the snowball effect, where they play a small minion at the beginning, and then they continue developing their board over a number of turns, therefore gaining as much tempo as possible every turn and really out-tempoing their opponents by continuing to snowball and snowball and snowball until they have way too much tempo that it's easy to finish off their opponents. If you look at one of my favorite lists in Standard right now is Tempo Demon Hunter. They gain tempo by playing very efficient, stat-heavy cards on curve. For example, a Battle Fiend is a 1 mana 1/2 that has the chance to grow as your hero attacks, literally giving you 1 extra tempo every time your hero attacks, which is also giving you tempo if you're killing off your opponent's minions. Beaming Sidekick is a 1/4 worth of stats onto the board, assuming you hit something else, and then a 2/2 worth of stats just by itself generically. All these again for 1 mana. Guardian Og Merchant giving you Divine Shield, plus triggering your Animati Berserker or your Bone Chewer Brawler for even more triggers. Satyr Overseer, it's a 4 mana 10 stats onto the board, because a 4/2 plus a 2/2 is a total of 10 stats. Very high tempo plays. Cards like Glavebound Adept, of course, as I mentioned, and Warglaves of Azzinoth will often remove a lot of your opponent's board for some face damage, gaining you so much tempo that your opponent has a hard time recovering. The problem with tempo decks, and what they run into, they often run out of gas later on in the game. So this explains where they're going to end up on our triangle of metagame. Now, if you notice, this is the triangle that I talked about in my previous video. You have aggro, which beats control, control beats mid-range, and mid-range beats aggro in a generic metagame. So where does tempo fit into this? I often like to place tempo here. The thing about tempo is that it loses to slower matchups and then beats up on faster matchups. The reason being is that aggro wants to put a lot of cards down that hit face, often with poor stats. Tempo can take advantage of this by trading very efficiently, outvaluing their opponent in the mid-game, and then killing them before they get a chance to draw an out. It beats faster mid-range in usually the same way. Faster mid-range lists often play somewhat aggressive cards, trying to trade resources with their opponents, but a tempo deck could take advantage of this by being very efficient with their mana, rather than playing for the value game. Slower mid-range decks, and especially control decks, will often outvalue them. Control decks have removal, which is hard to calculate in the sense of tempo, or board wipes, which nullify any developed tempo onto the board. If you develop 20 tempo onto the board, it doesn't matter when your opponent can spend 1 card to wipe out. These are strong tempo plays by control decks. That's a lot easier because they're running these cards. Slower mid-range often can slot into having lots of removal and having lots of board wipes that can help deal with tempo decks. A good example of that is the Galakron Secret Rogue, because they run lots of removal and lots of threats that are relatively low tempo, but high value, and therefore outvalue the Tempo Demon Hunter matchup. Understanding this as at a base level helps understand what matchups, if you're trying to beat a certain deck out of the format, how you beat it. So how you beat Tempo, the easy way, is play cards that are super high value, even if you're not gaining Tempo yourself, because often with the best Tempo deck in the form of Tempo Demon Hunter, you can't beat it generically by out-tempoing it. So board wipes are often the answer. The problem in a format, when you look at the format as a whole, is that sometimes the board wipes are not as powerful as the Tempo decks. The Tempo decks are going to be able to build a board either too quickly or too easily after a board wipe, that the board wipe doesn't matter. I hope that cleared things up. Hopefully this is easier to understand, and that the meta theory is very fluid. There's a lot of decks that fit elsewhere onto the triangle to where it's not even a triangle anymore. It's more of a just ambiguous blob that tends to morph, but understanding the basics really helped to get a grasp on what the metagame looks like. If you have any questions, be sure to ask them in the comments. I'll answer anything, I promise. If you don't like this video, again, tell me in the comments. But if you did like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. But that's it for me today.